Dying Light 2 is a static, dull game that fails to improve on the first in any meaningful way. The world is oversaturated with fetch quests, filler content like parkour challenges, which are just time trials, and laboratories and mutant zombies you have to kill, and absolutely stuffed with things that are just so mindlessly repetitive that I'd be surprised if anyone took the time to even complete all of them. The story is often incoherent, and the game world feels poorly thought out. Oftentimes, characters would have very little motivation for acting the way they did, and I would lose track of people's names and characters that were on my side or were against me. I had really no idea what was going on and just started skipping cutscenes halfway through the game. The world building is also non-existent. For example, little things like why a character would be in this moment, how they got there, why does this character want this thing, what is the reason in the world for them wanting this as opposed to something else, totally lacking, and it makes the world feel really lifeless and not interesting at all. Choices as well feel basically pointless. This game really advertised as being a really impactful game where you get to make, long-lasting decisions that have big consequence. Well, there's really basically no consequence in this game. The big choices you have are few and far between. I'd say you maybe get 3 choices throughout the whole game that have any difference in outcome. Also, when you do make choices that you would think have some impact, they totally don't. For example, there's 2 factions in the game, and you have to decide where to distribute various radio towers and bases, which faction to give it to. Now, in the story, there's a point where you're working with one of the factions to capture a base, and then you have the decision to either give it to that faction or the other faction. I chose to give it to the other faction, but the faction that helped me get the base seemed to have no reaction to that. They didn't seem angry at all. They were just totally fine. And that doesn't really make sense in the context of the world. I think they'd be pretty angry that they'd help me get this for me to then turn around and give it to the other faction. But again, this game doesn't follow its own rules, and it's not consistent, and it just feels so pointless. So these choices feel so pointless. So a big reason why the first game was successful was the parkour. There's not a lot of first-person parkour games, and the first game really had a sense of exploration, and you're running on rooftops and escaping zombies and things like that. So you would assume that the parkour's at least good in this game, but unfortunately it feels like a step back. A lot of the times I was getting really frustrated just climbing buildings, particularly on the vertical axis. There's a similar problem with the Assassin's Creed games in that the character is fine when you jump up vertically onto a building, but the minute you turn a little bit slightly off that axis to try and jump onto something else, it just doesn't register. And the amount of times that this happened to me was staggering. I would be trying to get up a building, trying to make a jump. I slightly veer off the vertical axis, and the character just falls to his death. Does not grab the ledge, cannot physically grab the ledge. The amount of times that I've been climbing up a windmill or, trying to get a base or something and climbing up and making a big jump, only to have the character not grab the ledge, it was so frustrating. I got so annoyed at traversing in this game, which is really unfortunate considering that the first game's big draw was the traversal. So unfortunately, the traversal in this game is really disappointing, and it kind of also feeds into the skill trees that you get. They feel really bizarre because a lot of the skills that you upgrade are like climbing faster and running on walls and stuff, and I feel like the first game you already got those abilities, and it really, without the upgrades, the traversal was even worse. Like you climb so slowly, and it feels like those upgrades that you get should have already been given to the player at the start of the game. The last thing I'll say is that the combat also doesn't feel good. Fighting in this game is stiff and tedious. It takes way too long to kill enemies. Zombies seem to grab you all the time and take off way too much health. And human enemies in particular are very annoying to fight. They are constantly blocking your attacks, and the only way you can really break their guard is by grabbing them with a skill that you get, or kicking them, or just kind of waiting until they attack, which is really not very fun, just to kind of stand there and wait until they stop blocking. They also do these things called power attacks, which you cannot block or parry, and I just don't feel that those power attacks are well telegraphed. There's a little red like haze that goes over their head, and the issue is that when you're looking at enemies in the survivor detective vision, whatever it is, those enemy silhouettes are red. So I feel like they could have probably picked a different color to indicate, oh, a power attack's coming, make sure you dodge out of the way. Also feel like there's a real over-reliance on parrying in this game. If you don't parry, you're kind of fucked. You can't really dodge. The dodge doesn't work too well, so you have to dodge power attacks. But then at the same time, I found that when I did dodge power attacks, I would still get hit, especially with like the big brute enemies. I would still get hit because their power attacks are so big that you almost need like 2 dodges, which I don't know, like maybe the dodge timer or the dodge distance could have been bigger for the player to give them more room. But yeah, the combat itself is really, really annoying, and it just, there's nothing in this game that I can say, yes, this is really good, this is a reason to play this game. Also, one last thing is the loot in this game is really annoying as well. There's way too much of it. This game is stuffed with content to the point of bloat. There's so much like melee weapons and like pieces of wrist guard and helmets and stuff, and I feel like a lot of the loot I got didn't even help me get, like, it wasn't even good loot. I didn't feel a sense of progression where I'd get like a new helmet or something that was really good and like increase my armor. I barely even got any good loot throughout this whole game. So yeah, I mean, buyer beware. I would stay away from this game. Like, do not give it the time of day. I mean, unless they significantly overhaul the progression of the game, I can't recommend anything in this game.